Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this first Develop Croydon webinar. Today we're talking about the planning process, and hopefully in the next hour we'll be giving you all the opportunity to put your questions to our panel. And these are unprecedented times, and everyone is having to think very quickly about how to make sure that they can continue to do business, and not more so than actually all the people on this panel at this particular moment. I'm first of all going to invite, just ask all of our panel to talk to us. But first of all, I just want to tell you how you can also talk to us this afternoon. You have in your little bar at the bottom of your screen, you have the opportunity to ask us a question. You can do that by using the Q&A button. And if you actually want to ask your question in person, you can wave a virtual hand at me. And I will get a little blue hand that comes up against your name, and I'll be able to see that you want to ask your question in person. So any of you that want to do that, please just press that button. You can also chat to us this afternoon. There is a live chat bar. I suggest that you all keep that open, because our panelists may well be using that to give you additional information, or you may want to give additional information, or indeed you can ask a question via the chat button. So there's a couple of ways there that you can interact with us. And I hope that there's going to be a lot of interaction going on in the next hour. We're also going to be running a couple of polls this afternoon, and they'll pop up on your screen. And that will give us an opportunity to gauge how you're all feeling about Croydon, about the future, and also about the planning process. So when they pop up, we will be asking you to fill those in. Now, this afternoon, the panel is going to be chaired by my co-host, who is a familiar face to everyone, I'm sure, Richard Plant, partner at SHW, and also the chair of Develop Croydon. Also this afternoon, we're delighted that Darren Nathan from London Square is here with us. Darren is sponsoring this panel, and is also going to be able to talk to us about the scheme they're bringing forward at West Croydon with St Michael's Square. Councillor Paul Scott, everyone will know, doesn't need an introduction. Delighted that Paul is with us, and the same for Heather Cheeseborough, very important person in this whole planning debate, and we're delighted that both of you are with us. Also joining us this afternoon is Anna-Marie Compton from Network Rail. Anna-Marie is going to be talking to you all about the latest things that are happening around the whole of the East Croydon development site, and it'd be really helpful to hear her thoughts on how the consultations and the planning process will be continuing despite us being in this lockdown state. And also with us is Peter Beggan. Pete, again, another familiar face from PA Housing, will be talking to us about how they're coping and having to adapt in this current scenario. So moving on swiftly, I'm now going to hand over to Richard to talk to us a bit more. Richard.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Good afternoon, everybody. First things first, just to say thank you to London Square for sponsoring this webinar. Obviously, planning is a live process that involves committees getting out, inspecting properties, and looking at development. And obviously, with the current situation, that provides various challenges. So we're going to explore those challenges now in lockdown, and perhaps also look forward to, as the lockdown is hopefully relaxed a little bit, what happens moving forward. So the first question, really to introduce you obviously to Councillor Paul Scott, and perhaps Paul, you could give us a brief update on how your virtual committee process and planning is moving forward in this environment from your point of view.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Richard. Well, obviously, we have unprecedented times as the term that's being used a lot at the moment, but I think that also sort of applies in a totally different way to Central Croydon. I mean, there's an awful lot of development happening at the moment, and there's an awful lot more that we want to see coming forward. So we see the continuation of planning as being absolutely key for the future of the borough as we hopefully bounce back from the economic difficulties that the pandemic is causing. So we're trying as far as is possible to have business as usual. Officers, of course, are distributed around the country, working from their bedrooms and on their kitchen tables and that kind of thing. But we are trying to make sure that the planning system in all its sort of different aspects continues to work. And a good example of that is we've now moved, like many boroughs have, to having virtual planning committees. We had our first one of those was on Thursday last week. We changed things a bit in terms of we only got 5 members sitting on the committee instead of 10 to make it more manageable. But we did at that meeting receive 2 pre-app presentations on very major schemes. And also, of course, we gave planning consent for the Fairfield Home Scheme for 421 new homes and other facilities as a key part of the Fairfield Master Plan. So things are continuing to move on despite the difficulties, but we have an excellent team of officers who are continuing going, keeping calm and carrying on.
Excellent, thanks. And the next question to Heather: how has the London Borough of Croydon team been adapting to the new environment?
Good afternoon. Well, I think my officers have worked incredibly well under such a sort of sudden announcement of lockdown. We had a little bit of time lead-in so that officers went out there and did lots of site visits before the lockdown so that they knew that they had done what they needed to do to get these cases written up. So that was useful. And our ICT team had rolled out from last summer Microsoft Teams, which has made an absolutely unbelievable plus to how we work. And in fact, I mean, I was talking to the team today, if we hadn't had Microsoft Teams, we would not be able to do what we've been able to do. And we know from the early days of the lockdown when we checked across with other London authorities who was managing, and it was those authorities who did not have the investment in IT that were really struggling on keeping going business as usual. So we've had lots and lots of applications in. We're only effectively about 10% down this time last year. In the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, in fact, we had more applications than we usually get. They're starting to tail off a bit now. So all the case officers are working at capacity, as Councillor Scott said. They're all over the country, in homes or parent homes. A lot of them have got small children, so they're having to manage doing their planning day job, as long with, keeping an eye on kids, homeschooling and the like. In terms of the service, I'd like to think it's largely business as usual. We've done pre-apps and I think that they've been really successful. We've had really good feedback from applicants. And in fact, some applicants are saying, well, in future, we don't need to go into your offices. We can continue to do this remotely, which is fine by us. In respect of what we might have to do going forward, though, just managing workload, I think in the past we've been, really flexible with applicants, especially around pre-apps. So sometimes they want to change stuff after meetings before we give written responses. I think we might need to tighten that up a bit, because literally case officers are creaking now in terms of the amount of work they've got. And whilst you can carry on trying to do it business as usual as long as possible, the longer we go on in this, the sort of issues, people can't do it forever, let's put it that way. They're really working hard to try and be as seamless as possible, but it's not, there are problems with it, and the sooner we can get back in the office, at least for some people, and get out on site, because we're obviously not doing site visits, the better it will be. Just a couple of other things. We are extending our consultation periods in terms of that, so that members of the public can have longer, 4 weeks instead of 3 weeks, to refer to committee. And the other thing is, in terms of enforcement, it's been quite interesting. So there are some developers out there who we think are taking advantage of this period to perhaps get up to some things they really shouldn't be doing. Now, enforcement is a priority 1 service, and we are sending in officers out to priority cases, but they are things like trees and listed buildings. So they can't do site visits if somebody is doing, starting on site before they should, or building a bit larger than they should. And we really would urge developers to not take advantage of that during these very, very busy times.
Yes, certainly. And I mean, what about processes changing? I mean, you mentioned the timetable for consultation there, but anything else?
Well, the government hasn't cut us any slack. They've said you get on and do it as normal, and they've not changed the statutory targets they set us. So we're still working under that, and you know, it's a useful target to keep to, and we've always maintained, you know, a performance well above government targets. So no, not really, but I think it will boil down to when we can get back on site, because there will come a point when we can't take applications any further. And whilst, as I said, officers have got a good caseload that they can get on with, for instance, we had a number of major applications come in from Brick by Brick, major schemes. We're putting site notices up at the moment once a week, which is slightly different to what we used to do, but we obviously can't take forward anything particularly complex or major without a site visit, and that will start to slow the process down if we can't get out on site.
Definitely. Well, thanks very much, Heather. Darren, welcome back to Croydon. It seems like an absolute age ago that we first started talking about West Croydon, sitting having a coffee at Mippim on the beach. But here we are, and the deal is done. So how are you adapting to the current situation?
Richard, firstly, thank you very much, and thanks to Develop Croydon as well. We're delighted that we secured St Michael's. It was a scheme that got its planning consent in 2017. As you well know, it's making or will make a phenomenal change to West Croydon with the introduction of the public square. But there's more to it from our point of view as London Square, because we started London Square Partners just over a couple of years ago to work in partnership with public sector, and a scheme that was originally introduced with 35 affordable homes, 17% affordable housing, will now deliver over 55% through our partnership with Clarion. And I think it makes a real statement about what developers and public sector can do together, but also working with the council. Croydon, I remember 10 or so years ago describing as the Ron Seal of local authorities. To me, that still stands. Everything we needed to do to get this done, wherever it was, we got the help. Now, you said, as you know, we're a London-wide developer. We've got schemes in Bermondsey, we're in Islington, we're out in Orpington, and across to the east in Chigwell as well. We've got a lovely site down in Staines. We, like most developers, we were very respective of the lockdown and the need to provide a healthy and safe environment to make sure the NHS wasn't under pressure, and it's been under pressure. We know that. So we did close our sites. One or two were opened very carefully last week, and we've opened our sites this week. However, the activity on site is much reduced. We want to make sure of safe distancing. We want to make sure that everyone can get to and from the sites in a safe way. Being respectful of this is much wider than just the operation of the sites themselves. So things will be slower, but the most important thing is we're back on. We've got sales that we're committed to. We have an affordable housing program within our schemes that we're committed to. And it is absolutely essential that we carry on going. We've also got a couple of schemes in planning. And I think some of the things that we've seen recently are a real example of how some local authorities are a bit fleet of foot, and more so than others. Waltham Forest, we know, had its first virtual planning committee. It was semi-virtual because they had a few public in the gallery. That was the 2 days before legislation was changed, so that they complied. And as Paul and Heather have referred to, the planning committee last week shows that Croydon are there as well. We've got one or two schemes where the first virtual committees will not take place until the first and second week of June. And that clearly holds up the programme that we want to do in terms of developing and bringing forward homes. And it's not that those councils aren't trying. Everyone is trying in very difficult times. I think it just goes to show how some councils can react a little bit more quicker and a little bit more flexibly than others. Excellent.
Thanks, Darren. I think what you're saying is that Croydon as a planning authority is one of the best ones that you deal with across London, which is great. Pete, obviously from PA Housing, You know, a lot of developers must be running for the hills and being a little bit scared of buying stock at the moment. But how's the housing association kind of market view? And you know, are you still looking for sites? Are you still buying? Is it full steam ahead?
From our point of view, it's been a challenging few weeks. We've got 23,000 homes that we're currently managing. We've got 700 staff, which from lockdown we managed to mobilise very quickly to continue running a service to our 50,000 residents. So from that side of the business, it's been working great. Some of the challenges that we've got to overcome now are how we're dealing with sites that are in lockdown. We've got 28 sites, 17 of those are still in lockdown effectively. We're working with contractors, and over this week and towards the end of the last week, we've noticed that we've been able to start unlocking some of those sites. It's going to be challenging because we're going to have, the government rule of 2 metre distance on sites. As Nathan mentioned, how are you going to get people to site? What the welfare arrangements are going to be on site? We've got to work through with our contractors to do that. I think it's really important that we get those sites unlocked and get people back to work, and actually the housing delivery put back on track. With the lockdown, we've experienced 5-6 weeks now of not working at full capacity, and this will have a knock-on effect to our overall programme. Where we're looking to take handovers at Q4 of this year, we're already predicting that some of those are going to start slipping. So in response to that, we're going out and we're looking at what sites we can get involved in and buy, where it will give us completed units for this financial year. And that's one key thing that our board wanted us to push forward on. We've got a programme, we want to keep those numbers up. In terms of planning sites, we've had a couple of schemes that have been submitted. The last couple of schemes that came out of planning, a couple were in Croydon, one at Russell Hill. We've entered contracts on that. With all intention, we'd started some of the soft strip and the pre-demolition works, but that's had to go on hold. We're working with Selston to get that unlocked, and we can continue there. So that can unlock 150 new homes as a programme for this year. We've also got Matthews Yard. We'd started to strip out on that just after Christmas. And again, that's on hold, but we're working with Henry to get that unlocked. That'll be 60 homes just for London affordable rent. So we're pushing forward. Going forward, we've got a target of 5,700 homes over the next 10 years. We're on track to deliver that, but we'll only stay on track if we continue buying sites. So we're out, we're looking. We've got, in the last couple of weeks, we've had 25 sites brought to us, 16 offers have gone out. Of those that have been accepted, heads of terms are being worked forward. We're instructing the solicitors to work up the reports on title, and then we'll be looking to take these projects forward for approval at the back end of the summer with a view to getting into contracts in Q2, Q3 of this year. So from our point of view as a business, we are going to be working, we're going to be more due diligent, what's the impact of the sales market, where we've got sales units, we're going to look if we can flip those to affordable rent, just to de-risk some of the elements for us. But in general, we're confident that the market will continue. We're out there looking, and we will be working with our stakeholders, including planning, to make sure we can get back onto site with sites as soon as possible.
And I mean, looking to the future as we hopefully come out of this, do you have any view on whether the tenure type, i.e. shared or rented, shared ownership or rented, will demand change, do you think, in a post coronavirus period?
I suppose that depends on how quickly the economy gets back and recovers. At the moment, a lot of people are on furlough. I noticed yesterday that lenders were suggesting they'll still lend to people on current salaries if they are on furlough. So that gives our sales team confidence that there will be a market there. If this continues for much longer, there is a risk that jobs will fall by the wayside, and that will cut back on interest in the shared ownership market. But what we're looking at in every scheme that we do take forward, there is always going to be a risk of sales. So can we flip those sales units into rent? That will require additional grant on some schemes, and that's something we're already engaging in conversation with the GLA to see if we can pour additional grant in for some of those schemes. For us, if we start on site this week on a project, we're not going to be delivering that for 2 to 2.5 years, and maybe longer one from you working with restrictions on site. So, we'd like to think that in 2 years' time, we'll be in a different place, and there'll be a sales market. So the need for shared ownership will remain. But as a business, we will deliver 50% of our programme as London affordable rent or social rent. So we will continue looking for shared ownership. But we're confident. In a couple of years' time, there will be a market still there.
Super, thanks very much. And Anna Marie from Network Rail, I mean, obviously your primary scheme is the sort of East Croydon station redevelopment. Where have you got to in that, in terms of your consultation, etc.?
Yeah, so the consultation is planned for this June, so starting the 1st of June. So I think first of all, just when we talk about consultation, just to be clear, there's two kind of key strands of consultation. There's the statutory consultation and the public consultation. So the statutory consultation is with those whose property is affected by a scheme or land. So for example, it would be London Borough of Croydon, TfL, utilities and affected landowners. That is largely unaffected by the current situation because that can carry on how it would normally through meetings, virtually, through mail, correspondence, etc. But I think what we're going to talk about today is the public side, because when we talk about public consultation, we conjure up images of, public consultation events. So from a public consultation point of view, we have decided to press ahead, but obviously adapt how we would approach that. And we made the decision to proceed because essentially when life returns back to normal, our passengers and our freight providers still expect the railway to run reliably and on time. So it's important for us to plan for the long term. And indeed, the direction from the UK government is very clear that we need construction to carry on going and we need the economy to recover. So, we're trying to do our bit by keeping this project going. I'm sure many of you have been, heard of our proposal over the last 3 years. It's been a long time in development and, that's normal for a scheme of this size. So we didn't want to put the brakes on, we wanted to carry on. I think what is kind of working for us on our side is that consultation isn't prescriptive. There isn't, a regulatory approach to how you do it. It's very much based on the size and nature of the project in hand. So consultation can take many forms. It could be informal discussions, it could be meetings, it could be information leaflets, it could be websites, but it can also be the public information events. And that's largely kind of the big focus of our events, our consultation. But given the current situation, we can't do that. So we've had to rethink how we manage that consultation side. So the kind of two key things we've needed to consider, the first one being how we promote consultation in this situation, and secondly, how we facilitate it, making sure that it's accessible to everyone. So if I take the first one, first of all, so how do we promote the scheme? Ordinarily, we would hand out leaflets at train stations over a number of weeks, and in a project like this, it would be along the whole Brighton Main Line. Obviously, we can't do that, so we need to rethink how do we promote the scheme. So we've had to take a step back and think, well, how are people consuming news at the moment? Largely, people are doing it digitally, online. So there's obviously a big avenue there for us. And we know from previous consultation that over 70% of people that engage in the consultation do so online. But what about the other 30%? What about the people that don't go online? So we've needed to think a little bit differently. So as well as promoting digitally on social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and other kind of related sites, we'll do the standard newspaper promotions across the Brighton Main Line. But also we're introducing radio adverts this time because we're aware that there are some groups of society that don't access the internet and actually aren't leaving their homes at the moment to buy newspapers. So how do we get the information to them? So we're looking at radio broadcasts as well, which is something that we've not done in the past. We are lucky enough that the Royal Mail is still working, so we'll be providing letter drops to the Croydon area as well. So there'll be over 40,000 leaflets going out. So with the leaflets, the online digital and media, newspaper and radio, we think we can get the message out there that consultation is happening. So the second part is actually how do we facilitate that consultation if we're not having public information events? So first off, Network Rail has always had quite a strong digital kind of offering in its consultations, so that will continue. But what we're doing is enhancing what we offer. Ordinarily, we would have a website with all the consultation materials on there, so leaflets, booklets, maps and drawings. But what we're trying to do is replicate that face-to-face discussion that you would get in a public consultation that you wouldn't get from a website. So there's two key things we've introduced. One is an online chat facility, and many of you would have experienced this on, talking to your own bag and sort of booking a holiday. There'll be a pop-up in the bottom corner that says, do you want to chat to someone? So once somebody's read through the consultation material, if they still want to speak to somebody, there will be somebody there at that time. Now, there's set times for that because we obviously just can't run that 24/7, but that will be advertised on the website. But that doesn't help those people that don't use the internet. And talking to some of our colleagues in Croydon Council, we know that there is a fairly large proportion of people in the area that don't use the internet. So the way we've tried to capture that kind of group of people is by offering our direct consultation hotline. So not the Network Rail helpline that takes your message and passes it on to the team. It comes through to a switchboard and through to a number of volunteers within the team, so they can get that, you know, immediate conversation that you would get if you were speaking to someone. So those are kind of two examples how we're trying to help the facilitation. And Heather mentioned earlier that they're extending their consultation periods, and we're doing the same. So ordinarily a consultation that we run would last 6 weeks, of which there'll be about 2 weeks of public exhibition events. But we're actually extending that to about 14 weeks to run all over the summer, to give people as much opportunity as you can. And we'll be promoting that throughout that period to give people as much opportunity to engage with us as possible. So those are the two things we're doing to try and keep the consultation running.
Okay, excellent. Now, I just quickly wanted to mention there will be some polls as we move into the more general questions from the audience. And I don't know whether, Catherine, you want to explain how people join in with the poll, but I believe it pops up.
Yep, I think we're going to launch a poll pretty imminently. It will just pop up on your screen. There it is. Croydon's investment case. We're asking you how strong you think that the Croydon's investment case will be post-COVID-19. We're asking you to answer from 1 to 5, with 1 being the strongest. So if you're really confident that Croydon's going to be in a great place coming out, hit 1. If you're very unconfident, and hopefully nobody is going to hit 5, but we'll wait and see. And then we can share these results with you. So please take a few moments to answer that poll. Now, we have, Richard, started to have some questions in from the audience today. So just to remind you all, this is your opportunity to put your questions to our expert panel. And you are doing that already, which is great. I just want to ask, just give a shout out to Martin Robeson, who did submit a question in advance, and I believe is keen to put the question directly to the panel. If that's still the case, Martin, and you're with us this afternoon, can you just indicate that with a virtual hand button, and I will know to come to you to ask a question. In the meantime, we have a question that's been written in around the work that's being done looking at the local plan. And the question is around whether there is going to be any changes to the timeline, I guess. It's coming from Kevin Watson. He understands there's been a little bit of a delay and that the next consultation is towards the end of the year. But what's the update on that? Maybe Councillor Scott?
Well, as things stand at the moment, we're working to stick with the published programme. There's been certain sort of slippages on certain elements and difficulties with consultations, those kind of things on some of the supporting work. But we're still driving for the same programme, so the preferred options consultation will come out sometime in the autumn. Is still the intention. So we're still looking for the whole thing to be adopted sort of early 2022. We think is, I mean, again, it's all part of the ongoing sort of message I was saying earlier on. You know, we need to keep driving things forward. We need the changes that the partial review are considering. You know, key focuses on the housing crisis and the environmental crisis. Those things aren't going to go away. So we need to keep business as usual and working away at delivering that updated local plan.
Yeah, actually, just one point. Do you think any of the previous reviews will need to be done again in the light of the current situation? So, for example, there was a green space review, wasn't there? Well, everybody's in the parks more than ever now, but also there was consultation on Purley Way, which is obviously now, being such a key centre for distribution, you know, its level of importance has risen and probably will continue to rise even after this crisis.
Heather?
Well, actually, it's quite an interesting time in terms of drafting policy on the local plan, because we did the issues and options consultation just after Christmas. And what the team have been doing up until now is understanding the feedback from that consultation and drafting, sort of setting out structures for the chapters, each policy chapter. And we're So we're right in the middle of deciding what are we going to review and how we're going to review it and how are we going to respond to not only the consultation but the current situation. So the points you make about Pearly Way are well made, and the sort of challenge at the same time to it is our ability to future gauge, bearing in mind that this has sort of come out of nowhere. We are in lockdown, so understanding the implications of all this going forward, we have to do crystal ball gazing. But for instance, you know, some of the key conversations I've been having with Steve Denton, Head of Planning Policy, is around, for instance, things like retail, the town centre, because obviously retail was having a tough time of it before all the lockdown, and it seems to have accelerated what's gone on. But also, what does it mean if it has accelerated, and how can we make sure we write policy that is flexible and will support the recovery, but at the same time we can't totally second guess everything. So that's the challenge we've got at the moment. Pearly Way is obviously important. We're very keen to ensure that, you know, logistics and industrial sites are safeguarded. Fundamentally though, the housing crisis has not gone away. Issues of the importance of green space and enough amenity space is very important, obviously, and it's been highlighted in all of this. So it's trying to capture all that learning, but it comes down to fundamentally what I always say about local plans is that you make sure that you have up-to-date policy because you keep reviewing it, you keep it under review, and you have what I've always called is a disposable local plan. So you get on, you write it, you don't try and get the most perfect local plan in the entire universe. You get a good enough local plan and you get it adopted, and then you go straight into the next review, and you keep it alive and fresh in that way instead of trying to get the perfect product.
Can I just come in quickly just to say, in terms of the parks, there's been some confusion among some people about what it is we were consulting on. All of the parks and public open spaces in Croydon are all protected and will remain protected. Unfortunately, the government brought in this local green spaces designation, which I think has confused the hell out of lots and lots of people because they think it applies to all local green spaces, which of course it doesn't. It's about very special community local green spaces, which we are continuing to look at, and we're working with communities to identify whether those are the places they put forward are of significance to reach the very high bar that the government has set for that designation. But no, I mean, green spaces, open spaces, private amenity space, whether you're living in a flat or in a house, all remain incredibly important. I think one of the things that this has illustrated, though, is the difficulties that people have, particularly in older blocks of flats where there are no balconies, there are no private public spaces that they can actually use. We need to continue to move away from that. In fact, we have moved way beyond that already and have done for quite a few years.
Okay.
We have a question actually for Anne-Marie, Richard, and it's really a question which you may not be able to answer. I'm not quite sure if you're actually live with your new method, but the question is, how are your new consultation methods playing out? Are people calling the phone lines, for example, and what methods are proving the most successful?
Yeah, no, they don't actually go live until the 1st of June. So yeah, it's a good question, and I'm quite, nervous. I don't know how popular hotline will be or how the online chat facility will be. But what I think will happen is that, given the current situation has evolved in the way it has, that engaging digitally will become the norm. I don't think we'll ever go back to how it was before in the way we consult. I think we're going to learn from this and actually take it as an opportunity to try new different things. So even come the end of the year, if you are able to hold public exhibition events, I think there will be a lot of developers still wanting to push the digital side, because I think there's going to be a lot of benefits for the further reach for that. So certainly from a Network Rail's point of view, yeah, we'll be keeping a close track on, how the different chat facilities and the hotline is utilised, and using that to inform future consultations. So yeah, we can feedback after the consultation and let you know how those are working.
So I guess that ties in actually to the question that's come in from Tom Castro. Heather, question for you. Do you think there could be a positive impact as a result of current circumstances in terms of use of technology during the planning process. The use of Zoom, etc., could speed things up and improve dialogue between applicants and the council. Question for you, Heather?
Undoubtedly, yes. I think it's been, as I said, it's been fantastic the way we can engage on pre-apps so easily. You get everybody around. And in fact, we did the first pre-app a couple of days into lockdown, and we were all a bit nervous about how it'd actually go because it was a really important site. And it went swimmingly well. Now, it's a two-way thing, though. It's not just about us, the council, having the kit. It's about also the applicants having the kit and the ability to use it as well. But I think largely people have, got into using it. I think, as Anne-Marie was saying, though, there is still some sectors of the community who don't use the internet and that sort of technology. So there's always a need to be able to engage in more traditional ways. And I also think that on things, particularly like the local plan, you really need to go out and meet people face to face, communities, and have workshops and hands-on sessions. And we did a whole lot of that around the consultation issues and options stage with our urban room, where we had a shop in the Whitgift Centre, and people dropped in and had events and workshops, and that was incredibly successful. And I think we need to do more of that and not rely just on virtual technology.
Great. I've got a question around the community infrastructure levy. Has any consideration been given to extending the payment deadlines for this to account for a slowdown in delivery on sites that closed during the COVID-19 period? I don't know which one of you would like to answer that.
I suppose I would try and do that one. I mean, the stuff about SIL is that it's very much legislated around from government. The local authority doesn't really have a lot of flexibility within it. So we have to work within the legislation, and in the first instance, if developers have got real problems, then to speak to the SIL team about it, because I think we do have some flexibility in phasing of payments, but I think have conversations early on with case officers and the SIL team to see what we can do on it. We want to try and help developers as much as possible. We don't want to thwart or to stop development. Equally, SIL is quite, as I'm sure most developers will be aware, is quite it's sort of quite clunky, and it's a tax effectively, and the government set the regulations, and we have to just get on and abide by them largely.
Okay, that's great. I've got a question that I think I'm going to put to Darren. It's a little bit of a tricky one, and it's something that many businesses are finding at the moment. The question is, how do we get the small micro businesses involved in some of these key projects that are going to find it very hard to keep going in the current climate? How, I guess, as you as a developer, you're bringing forward a big site. I'm sure that you've got policies about procuring locally. What more can the developers be doing to trying to engage some of the smaller businesses part of the supply chain in this current time?
Oh, thanks, Catherine. That's a nice question to throw to me. Look, I'm going to be fairly general in the way that I answer this, because I'm not the delivery side of London Square, but I've worked in this industry for a long time, and I think it's underestimated a lot how much the construction industry does already do to work with a lot of local businesses and small businesses. West Croydon will be my fourth project in Croydon. I've done 3 previously, and in every case we worked with local businesses, local supply chain, the local colleges, to try and generate. And I think there's a lot that goes on here, where a lot of meet the buyer events, where they can be quite bespoke and specific about the size of contracts that are being awarded, would be one of the ideas that I think we could all bring to the table. I think it's really important for all the people in the construction industry to work together in helping to come up with those sorts of events. And I genuinely believe that we could look at different local authorities and try and understand what skill sets each are really honed in there at them, and how we can try and utilise them better. And for Croydon, it's Croydon's a big borough. It reaches out to quite much broader areas that go much further south than just East Croydon and just over to the west to West Croydon. And there's lots of conversations we can have, and we just need to engage more. And we will hold Meet the Bar events. We'll get involved with local subcontractors and trades to try and make sure that everyone gets a chance to work on new projects. And we need to help generate and support generation of new skills as well.
Okay, so here's a question which I know you can answer related to that. Will the delivery of St Michael's scheme help to stimulate further regeneration around West Croydon and London Road?
I'd imagine there'll be a lot of nods around the panel, actually. I think that through no fault of the councils, I think it's just the way that the boroughs work. There's been a lot happening with focus on East Croydon and that metropolitan centre of East Croydon. I think it is unquestionable that, look, one of the things that London Square that we liked, when I took this to my chief exec, Adam Lawrence, one of the things we looked at straight away was how it would open up through from where Westfield will eventually come up through an open piazza and square. That does not exist at the moment. That's going to open up a new route to West Croydon Station and the bus station. I think if you look at the shops around and then go up London Road, there's no question that inward investment has a micro effect and then a macro effect, and it will start to help invest across those other areas going north and across from West Croydon Station. So I think it's unquestionable that this will help be a catalyst to that. It will not be the only scheme that contributes to that, and we will not be the only developer. We're going to do our very best to make sure that we make our contribution.
Councillor Scott, I'm sure you want to say something about West Croydon, the importance of it.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, we certainly hope it is going to have a massive stimulus to that area. It's one of the reasons why we were always so keen on the scheme, and have been very supportive and are very pleased that it's coming forward now. The area around that part of Croydon clearly needs some serious investment. It's got a lot going for it, but it's looking rather sad at the moment. And I think opening up the sort of route through, opening up in terms of people wanting to go there, moving north into the sort of what you might call sort of Croydon sort of Curry Mile, that sort of area, I think can be really, really beneficial for that whole area. And so yes, it's a really important scheme, and hopefully it will generate many more.
Back to you, Richard, because I know there's a lot of redevelopment going on down from West Croydon through London Road down to Thornton Heath, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the area has come up already quite well. I mean, really, Saffron Square is West Croydon more than it is East. So, and interchange as well. So you've already had two major successful schemes, and obviously with the bus station being, I think it won an award, didn't it, for its design? So, and West Croydon is, I think it's one of only a couple of places in South London where you get the tram, heavy rail, and notionally the tube, as well as the buses, all coming together in the same place. So. Anywhere else in South London would be really proud of a station as good as West Croydon. We just happen to be spoiled by the services at East Croydon. So I think it's it will be a massive success, and I think you will see the improvement kind of moving up London Road, and we do need that end of the town sort of tidied up, as it were. Sorry, Heather. Oh, Heather's mute, Catherine. Yeah.
Right. You're on.
Oh, hang on.
You're on. No, go on. We can hear you.
Okay, yeah. Just to say that, yeah, the council recognises the importance of West Croydon, and we've been doing a lot of work around West Croydon Station for the past couple of years with Network Rail and TfL to look at redevelopment proposals. I mean, it's not straightforward because there are quite technical issues, and Anne-Marie might know about this, to do with Network Rail's wanting to safeguard future rail capacity and alignments in that area and what we can do. But we have got consultants on board looking at it, and I think Pete Beggan's been involved in it as well. to do a redevelopment that would deliver a new station at West Croydon, and new homes and some commercial space. So that's something the council is actively working on at the moment. Obviously, it's taken a little bit of a slowdown with what's happening at the moment with because TfL are furloughed and it's just so busy generally. But we are pushing that ahead, and I think it's a really important part of Croydon Town Centre's redevelopment and renaissance, and I would like to see that scheme developed before the East Croydon, because it's actually quite a deliverable scheme.
Excellent.
Thank you. Richard, I've got a question for Pete. It's from someone called Kevin Clark, who says, "Hi Pete, I hope you're well."
Yeah, we hope Kevin well as well. Yeah.
I understand you've already suggested your board will start considering new projects in the late summer, but being honest, do you think until the market stabilises, you and other RPs will focus on just rented tenures? Also, like other people have mentioned, could boards also utilise these video conferencing formats to perhaps meet more regularly and expedite the process? Pete.
Well, hi Kevin. As a board, they have actually started using the video conferencing, the Zoom meetings. I think they've had their 3 meetings so far by this way, and they've all worked well. So that's something that's already in hand. In looking at schemes, we will be looking at shared ownership and rent, because we get grant from the government, we've got funding, we just secured £180 million of new funding to go out and deliver schemes with. But that funding does rely on income from sales from the shared ownership. So we can't purely deliver a programme of 500 plus homes a year just reliant on rent. So we do need the shared ownership schemes. And that's what we're looking at. We've got one just last week where we were hoping to take forward. The developer put it on hold, so we did, and they've come back on Friday and said, no, they've changed their mind, they're back on the hook with it. And that would be looking to deliver all the shared ownership. It's not huge, but it is a pure shared ownership scheme. So, previously, the Russell Hill site, 150 homes, 50 of those will deliver as London affordable rent, the remainder is shared ownership. So as long as we've got a good timeline to market and sell these homes for, there's confidence behind us as a board that we can actually deliver on this. I think what we just have to be clear on is what our sales and marketing strategy is. Rent can be charged up to 2.75% of unsold equity, but that's not going to be typically affordable for everybody. So we're going to have to look at how we put our bids forward with the affordability caps around shared ownership. But I don't see shared ownership as being dead. I don't see our board not wanting to progress with schemes without shared ownership in.
Right, thank you. I just want everyone who can give me a virtual wave against your name, and that means I can invite you into the conversation. You can put your question live to our panel. So don't be shy. If any of you are out there want to do that, please do give me that virtual wave and I'll bring you in. A quick question from David Mabb at Montague Evans. I guess one for Heather. It's around staffing levels. Clearly, the team are working really hard and having to cope with all of these changes. He is saying that he's aware there's a number of positions within the planning team that are vacant. Is there any update on the recruitment drive in this current situation for these positions?
We are continuing to recruit. We're kind of hoping that with all the uncertainty out there, that there may be some planners from the private sector who may be interested in coming into local authority to broaden out the pool of applicants. But we continue to recruit. It's slightly slowed down because obviously the council has been busy responding to the emergency effort. So it's not like the council has just been getting on with business as usual. They've had all the additional emergency response to deal with that, and with the remote working with staff as well, that HR have been under huge pressure to do an awful lot in a very short order, and there has to be sort of prioritisation of where HR is spending their time. But planning is recognised as a very important service within the council. We certainly will be seeking to fill posts as soon as possible, and it's just the straightforward problems that go with trying to recruit within the environment that we're at the moment, where we're going to have to run virtual interviews, and it's just a bit slowed down. But we will, if we've got issues, there's always agency staff, and we try to make sure that we have a fully staffed up team. But similar to a lot of local authorities across London, getting the right skills in our staff who are out there to draw upon. You know, there's a very small pool of really, really good planners, to be honest, and we're all in competition.
Okay, there's a couple of questions that are all related to the London plan. The first is around the broadening of the plan to include a wider range of scenarios, given the current situation. It's going to be even more difficult at the moment to predict the demand for different uses. So will the different options be included in the plan to cover this? And then a secondary one related for the need for the local plan to be flexible, particularly in relation to the high street. With the likely reduction in globalism, is it possible that the high street may be reignited and indeed be re-enlivened? And is that possible? Do you, either you or Heather or Councillor Scott, feel this is something that may need to be taken into account as we come out of COVID-19? I don't know, Paul, do you want to on that one, or Heather?
Yeah, kick off on that one. I think flexibility is the absolute key, and I think we do need to look at that. Nobody knows. I mean, at the best of times, what's going to be happening going forward, particularly with the need for commercial space and the sort of commercial space that's the required, how it's going to be used. So I think we need to build flexibility into everything we're doing. I mean, in terms of sustainability as well, we want buildings that can adapt and change over time in the long term, but also in the short term. And indeed, their uses, I think, need to be very flexible as well. So we need to be looking at that as we move forward with the local plan. We already have quite a lot of flexibility, but I think it's one thing that we do coming out of this crisis need to consider more.
Right. I'm going to go live to Martin Robeson, who is wanting to ask his question live. I'm attempting to unmute you, Martin, but you might need to do that yourself. So do you want to put your question to the panel?
Hi, hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Can I just say thank you, Develop Croydon, for setting this up. Absolutely great. It's a process question. Sorry, Heather. Sorry, Paul. As a business representing developer interests with several major schemes potentially ready to go into planning, others sitting within the process, and one I understand that seems to be on the very verge of imminent planning committee consideration, I would say for rather too long, I would plead for a fundamental overhaul of the public planning committee sessions to ensure that the important business that is done there and now in front of a potentially enormous living room audience is speeded up and made much more efficient. You cannot really serve the interests that I and many others represent by dealing, as at the last committee meeting, with one admittedly controversial, so we say, decision by using the whole of a fortnightly meeting just for that one item. And whilst potential applicants benefit from the committee's pre-app consideration, those debates don't really need to be directly competing for the scarce time against the prime time decision-making interests that are otherwise left in a queue that seems to be getting longer and longer. Thank you.
Shall I respond to that one first?
Let Councillor Scott go first, and then I'll talk a little bit and pick up some other issues, around it.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, if we look at, particularly at the committee that we held last week, it was a slightly unusual one. It was the first virtual planning committee for the borough, and it was working with councillors and officers using technology they hadn't used before. So it was a slightly unusual one in that we had two pre-apps for consideration, and they allowed us to sort of ease ourselves into the system. And then we had admittedly just the one application decision, but it's a particularly complex scheme on a particularly complex site. And so no apologies for that, frankly. That was I think it was the right thing to do in the circumstances. in terms of sort of prioritising committee items on the agenda, I have some sympathy, I have to say, for the idea that at that moment we always take the pre-apps first, and appreciate that there are sort of certain reasons for that in terms of obviously paying for the pleasure of coming to the planning committee. But I think there is, we could actually reconsider their positioning in the agenda. The difficulty we have is, of course, never knowing quite how long the rest of the agenda is actually going to take when it comes to the decision making on applications. So it is a difficult one, but we can certainly consider the order further.
Yeah, just to follow up a bit on that, I think it raises a number of points. I mean, let's be clear. Doing a virtual planning committee is a very, very different thing than doing a physical planning committee. And we were catapulted into this. And remember, the government had to write new regulations, speedily to allow local authorities to do this. And to be honest, the regulations are relatively, they don't provide a huge amount of guidance. But critically, we have to have a meeting held in public, so the ability to live broadcast is very important, and that's no easy feat to do and get right. You're bringing together a bunch of people who haven't used that technology before. I mean, for officers it was much more straightforward because we've been using it for several weeks every day, whereas you're bringing in members who perhaps have only used it a couple of times. And then you've got all the challenges of how do you bring in external parties to it. And we have heard about some rather interesting planning committee members which were taken over by pornography, for instance. I think it took place in Somerset. And so we were very keen that that sort of thing didn't happen to our planning committee. So we've got all those considerations going on. And as a planning authority, we've got to arbitrate, remember, position between developers and what the public also need to, they've got to feel as if that they've got access to it and that their voice is heard. And so we're very keen to make sure that we do facilitate public engagement with those meetings as much as possible within the constraint of the technology. We also, in terms of the pre-apps, we know from developers that they do greatly cherish having that ability to get that feedback. And whilst you might find it, you might criticise why you prioritising pre-apps over decisions. Possibly if it had been you who had been lined up to hear a pre-app going to committee and had been waiting several weeks, you'd be very pleased to hear that. And you'd want to have that service, particularly as you've paid for it and you've got it in your PPA. So I make no apology to Councillor Scott for having pre-apps. I think it's important to do so. I think also we have looked at it critically, and we're aware that it did take a long time, and we are going to do some work around trying to make it a lot more succinct and efficient. And we're keen to make sure that we continue planning committees regularly and try and get as much as possible through it. But I think critically, though, you can't just say a physical planning committee meeting can be easily taken into a virtual scenario and have the same experience. There are things that we need to change and tinker to ensure that we get the right outcome, and that as many people as possible, including the public, feel that they've had the ability to engage fully in the process.
Richard, I think you wanted to comment on that.
All I just wanted to know was whether the virtual one was quicker or took longer than the normal one.
No, it took longer.
Right.
And that is what we need to work at in terms of making it more efficient. But I don't think it will be quite the same as a physical one. I don't think we're going to have long agendas, because there's also the very fact that you're sitting there on Microsoft Teams, and you might well have done as an officer or somebody in meetings all day on Microsoft Teams, and then you go into an evening planning committee meeting. You can't expect somebody who's done 12 hours on meeting remotely, and then to, during the day job, and then to go into a planning committee meeting of say 4 or 5 hours. You just can't keep the concentration up, and your back aches as well, because we're all sitting at home on kitchen chairs and whatever. We haven't got ergonomically designed office chairs. I certainly haven't. I've got a pillow behind me at the moment.
Okay. I think Paul was going to say something as well.
Sorry, I'll unmute you, Paul. There you go.
Yeah, I was just quickly going to say we did have obviously a new chair. Chris Clark was elected as the new chair of the planning committee. He was having to pick up, very experienced chair in other fields, but he was having to pick up the system as well. Plus, also it's slightly slower because we have to make sure that you're going around each member of the committee to make sure they've had their final chance to have their say, etc., etc. And all of that does actually take more time. But also, just finally, just to quickly say, it actually wasn't a particularly controversial application. I think we'd had 4 objections on such a massive scheme. It's hardly any at all. So,
Richard, I've got conscious of time. We've just launched the final poll, which is asking which elements of the planning process people think would work better virtually online. And I guess that leads us into the last couple of questions, which are actually talking a little bit more about the future as we come out of this current scenario and how we all need to be adapting. First of all, a question which I guess from a Develop Croydon point of view, we could certainly answer, and that's about, is there a working group to reopen Croydon and attract people back, and how can the council help? Firstly, we were delayed by Brexit, that delayed speculative development, and now obviously we've gone into COVID-19, which further impacts the problem. And can the same group focus on strategy for inward investment? I'd just like to say that that's already started. I'm sure it certainly started from a Develop Croydon point of view. Heather, Councillor Scott, I'm sure that's happening already, starting to think about how we come out the other side. And the other question was saying, we would all very much like to go back to normal, in inverted commas, but we all, I think, know that this probably won't be the case. And as an industry, that we all need to adapt and change. And I guess final points from everyone would be around interested to hear panelists' views on how they see the various sectors and trends changing and developing as a result of the current pandemic. So Richard, back to you, but I think it might be helpful to go round and ask everybody that last point.
Yeah, just on the Develop Croydon bit, I think we'll be needed more than ever. I think Croydon will need to compete against many other areas, and I think we may actually see some sort of benefits. I think there's clearly going to be a lot of movement in the office market, because I think some working from home will continue, but then on the other hand, with social distancing, maybe we need to sit further apart. So who knows? We were about to move into agile working, where everybody had smaller desks crammed in fairly close together. Maybe that's not a good idea in the new world, but we just don't really know. But equally, maybe people will be less inclined to want to sit on a train going into central London and then a bus and a tube, etc., and be more inclined to base their office nearer where they may live. I don't know. So I'm sure there will be changes, and we'll have to react. And I think it really, at the moment, it will all depend on the science behind this, as they keep saying, but on whether there's a vaccine, does the virus mutate, basically what happens next. And I don't think anybody really knows that yet. But so I suppose I mentioned transport there. So shall I go to Anna Marie? What do you think happens next, and what will be the changes that you envisage?
Yeah, well, we do still think that passenger numbers will eventually return. I think one of the things you mentioned about the changing situation, I think never has it been truer that take one day at a time. 6 weeks ago we thought that we'd all be back to normal by the summer, but as you say, we now know that social distancing is probably going to be here to stay. They're clearly challenging times for the country and the rail industry. As I said, we do believe they will eventually return to normal. And when it does, passengers and freight users will still expect their trains to run safely, reliably, and on time. And indeed, the same applies to not wanting to be crammed into an office. You don't want to be crammed into a train. But fundamentally, the Croydon bottleneck remains the single biggest constraint for train punctuality and capacity on the Brighton Main Line and its branches. So unless action is taken, the services is never going to improve. So we do think that our proposals are long term, and we do intend to still progress them, but we will, like all of you, monitor it on a day-to-day basis because things are just changing so rapidly.
Okay. I'm just going to move round in the order that everybody is on my screen. So that would be you, Pete, next. Any comment on the future of affordable housing, demand, etc.?
Demand is definitely going to be there. There's probably going to be more demand for rental accommodation than there will be shared ownership for the foreseeable future. But demand will be strong. And as long as we can engage virtually with our local authorities to talk through planning applications, and we'll see that as a benefit, engaging with the local community virtually should be better for us, because many times we've held public consultations and you've ended up 3 hours in there and had seen 5 or 6 people. If we can get on a digital platform and get more feedback, hopefully that will give us more confidence going forward with planning applications. And the other thing is, what we are experiencing, we think we're going to see longer build time. We're going to have to restructure and look at our programme and work with developers to make sure that we can get schemes underway straight away and to keep that programme going, the supply of housing.
Okay, so you mentioned programme and build time, so it's probably Darren next. Have you got anything to add to that, obviously delivering affordable housing?
Look, I think first of all, every project that we look at will have a real focus on the safety of communities and high streets and what's going on at ground level. We in our sector know that for the last, 10, 15, 20 years, there has been a shortfall on the number of homes delivered. And at the last election, there were numbers bantered around of 250, 300 and 500,000 homes a year shortfall. So we know that we all need to work and deliver those homes. I do think that coming out of COVID-19 and as the lockdown is lifted, the one thing that will come to the absolute fore is, if we just look at this panel, how we work together across all entrants to the sector, whether it be the public and local authority, the housing association, the private sector, and organisations like Network Rail and London Transport, to make sure that everything goes forward in a very positive way. And I think right now is the perfect time for us all to really pull together, because that's the way we will come out of this successfully.
That's a very good point. I mean, that's basically what Develop Croydon was born out of, an effort to come out of the last recession. So if we're having another one, we'll be here to help this time as well. So, Paul, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think it's too soon by far to tell what changes, what differences this pandemic will make to the way that we develop our town, and indeed the way that towns and cities develop going forward into the future. I mean, we talk about this being a sort of unprecedented, but it isn't. And throughout the whole of history, there have been awful pandemics, in fact, much worse than this one. And cities and towns still exist. People are social animals. They still want to be together. And whilst most of us might not like being packed on public transport, most of us don't mind being packed in the pub on a Friday evening, for example. And I think that will come back. So I don't think we should overreact. But I think what we do need to be making sure is that we are getting the basics of good design and good placemaking right. And we are recognising the need for open spaces, great public realm, private spaces where people can go outside and have a breath of fresh air, or play with a dog or whatever it is. Make sure those are happening, and make sure that we're also developing decent homes. So that if there are times when people are stuck in them, that they have got the space and the air quality and the daylight and et cetera, that they really need. So I think we need to think about the basics, and also, as I mentioned earlier on, flexibility. The one thing we know that will always happen is change, and we need to be designing for and considering that change.
Thank you. And Heather, obviously we've sort of established we don't know what's going to happen next, I suppose, but there will be change, and we obviously need to anticipate that and react to it. Do you think there will be changes in planning policy to sort of allow that, like maybe temporary planning consents or temporary changes of use, something to basically assist in the regeneration, in the using of empty properties and situations that may develop due to the virus?
I don't know, and the government's obviously got a lot on its plate. What it's obviously done over the fair few years now is try to dismantle the planning system and to push through things like PD, which is, I think, the wrong response. I think in these times where people have needed to have, as Councillor Scott said, you know, dwellings that have got proper space standards and proper private amenity space, etc., that is not facilitated through PD office to resi conversions. And unfortunately, the government seems hell-bent on pushing through more PD, which I think is to the detriment. So if it's more PD, I'm not interested, and I don't think that helps. And I think, frankly, you know, it's more about the planning authority, to be honest, working with developers in a proactive, positive way. And I don't think the planning system stops that happening. I think it's more about individuals working together and collaborating and making things happen. And planning policy doesn't, all the planning system that's currently in place doesn't stop that from happening. Usually it's particular stakeholders or players in that system that are not properly using the system for what it's for, which is to bring decent, sustainable development forward, and they basically want to thwart it for whatever reason. So if we all just try and collaborate with the existing system, then I don't see any problems.
Super, thanks. And I think we do all collaborate quite well, actually. You know, I think it's a very good development planning community in Croydon, and it's a pleasure to work in it. Catherine, do you have anything else to add?
And I was just going to really pick up on exactly what you've just said, and I think this afternoon's session is very much an example of how collaboration does work really well in Croydon and has done for a long time, and the sort of public-private sector partnership, obviously Develop Croydon and others that happen, I think are a really good example about how actually if everyone pulls together, we can definitely make things happen. And actually in times like this when you know, things are difficult, it is unprecedented, nevermore is there a need to do that. So I guess that's a fitting time, Richard, to sort of say a big thank you to everybody, both our panelists and the many people that are watching this afternoon, because actually if we can do more of this and talk more, be more open, we will achieve an awful lot more together. So Richard, a few final remarks from you.
Well, all I had left to say really was thank you very much to everybody for showing up, and thank you to White Label, Bonnie, etc. for facilitating and organising this. So no, thank you everybody, and I think that's a good point to end.
Just to say that this is being videoed, it will be available on the Develop Croydon website within 24 hours. So I'm conscious there's many people that couldn't get onto this afternoon, but this will be there for people to share. So it really just remains from us to say thank you all very much for taking part. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.